Hello. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you're lying down somewhere quiet, maybe in bed, maybe in the dark. The day is over, or nearly over, and you're trying to let go of it. You might be tired, but your mind hasn't quite caught up to your body yet. Thoughts are still drifting through, small worries, fragments of conversations, things you need to do tomorrow, or maybe just a feeling, hard to name, that sits somewhere in your chest. Tonight, we're going to spend some time together exploring an idea that might sound strange at first. We're going to talk about meaninglessness, not as something to fear, but as something that might, in its own quiet way, bring a kind of comfort. We'll move slowly. There's no rush. If you drift away from the words and come back later, that's fine. Nothing here needs to be remembered. Nothing here is a test. This is just a space to rest your thoughts for a while. The question we're circling around tonight is one that has appeared in human minds for thousands of years, in different languages, in different eras. It's a question that probably feels familiar to you, even if you've never said it out loud. What does it all mean? And the quieter question that sometimes follows, what if it doesn't mean anything at all? The weight of the question. There's something about nighttime that makes these questions feel heavier. During the day, we're distracted. We're moving, we have tasks and people and noise. But when the world goes quiet, when we're alone with ourselves, the question of meaning has a way of surfacing. You might have felt it before. Scrolling through your phone in the dark, looking at images of other people's lives, other people's purposes, and feeling a strange emptiness. Not sadness exactly, just a sense that something is missing, that you're supposed to know what you're doing here, and you don't. Or maybe you've felt it while going through the motions of a normal day, waking up, going to work or school, coming home, eating, sleeping, and then doing it all again. And somewhere in the middle of that routine, a thought appears. Is this it? Is this what life is? These moments aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're not symptoms of failure or weakness. They're actually very old human experiences. Philosophers have a name for this feeling, this awareness of life's potential meaninglessness. They call it confronting the absurd. But before we dive into philosophy, before we talk about thinkers and traditions, let's just sit with the feeling itself for a moment. The feeling of emptiness. Imagine you're standing in a vast open space. No landmarks, no signs, no path, just openness in every direction. Part of you might feel frightened by that. Without a path, how do you know where to go? Without signs, how do you know what to do? But another part of you, a quieter part, might feel something else, a kind of lightness, because if there's no path you're supposed to follow, then there's also no way to get lost. This is the strange comfort we're going to explore tonight. The idea that meaninglessness, rather than being something to run from, might actually be something we can rest in. It sounds contradictory, doesn't it? How can the absence of meaning be comforting? How can nothingness feel like relief? We'll get there slowly. We'll take our time. But for now, just notice that the question itself, the question of whether life has meaning, is already a kind of companion. Humans have been asking it for so long that you're not alone in asking it tonight. Nihilism and Absurdism, a gentle introduction. The two words we'll return to again and again tonight are nihilism and absurdism. They might sound heavy, they might sound dark, but we're going to approach them gently, the way you'd approach a deep pool of water on a quiet evening, just to see what it reflects. Nihilism, at its simplest, is the philosophical view that life has no inherent meaning or purpose. There's no grand plan, no cosmic reason for our existence, no ultimate truth written into the fabric of reality that tells us what we're supposed to do or who we're supposed to be. Absurdism is closely related but with a slightly different emphasis. Absurdism acknowledges that we, as humans, desperately crave meaning. We want our lives to matter. We want reasons and purposes and explanations. But the universe, as far as we can tell, doesn't provide them. The absurd is this clash, this mismatch between our need for meaning and the silence of the world. These aren't new ideas. People have been wrestling with them for centuries, but they became especially prominent in the 19th and 20th centuries, when traditional religious frameworks began to loosen their hold on Western thought, and people started to ask, if there's no God, no afterlife, no divine plan, then what are we left with? And some philosophers answered, nothing. We're left with nothing, and that's okay. The first breath of relief. Here's the first small comfort, the first gentle paradox. When you stop looking for a meaning that isn't there, you stop failing to find it. Think about that for a moment. If you've spent years of your life feeling like you're missing something, like everyone else has figured out the point of existence, and you somehow didn't get the memo, nihilism offers a different perspective. Maybe there was no memo. Maybe there's nothing to figure out. That doesn't mean your life is worthless. It doesn't mean your feelings don't matter. It just means you're free from the pressure of living up to some cosmic standard that never existed in the first place. You can breathe a little deeper with that thought. Your life doesn't need to justify itself to the universe. The universe isn't watching. The universe isn't judging. The universe, in its vastness and silence, simply is. And so are you. A pause in the dark. Let's take a moment here. Notice your breath. Notice the weight of your body wherever you're lying or sitting. Notice the temperature of the air. There's no need to hold on to every word you've heard so far. We're going to keep circling back to the same ideas, coming at them from different angles, so if your mind has already started to drift, that's perfectly fine. We have hours together. There's no rush. The question of meaning, or the absence of meaning, isn't something to solve tonight. It's just something to sit with, something to let wash over you like a slow wave. In a moment, we're going to step back in time. We're going to visit some of the people who thought deeply about these questions, but we'll do it gently, without pressure, without urgency. For now, just rest in the quiet. Rest in the strange, soft idea that maybe you don't need all the answers. Maybe the questions themselves are enough. Where the questions come from, before nihilism had a name, people were already feeling its presence. In ancient times, in moments of grief or uncertainty, in the silence after loss, humans have always wondered whether their actions mattered, whether anything lasted, whether the universe cared. Different cultures answered this question in different ways. Some built elaborate religious systems to provide meaning. Some created myths and stories that gave shape to the chaos. Some turned inward, to meditation and detachment, seeking peace not in external meaning but in the stillness of the mind. But underneath all of these responses was the same fundamental encounter, the encounter with a world that doesn't speak back to us in clear language, a world that doesn't tell us why we're here or what we should do. Nihilism as a formal philosophy is what happened when people stopped trying to cover up that silence, when they stopped pretending they had answers they didn't have, when they looked directly at the possibility that life might not mean anything at all and decided to explore what that possibility felt like. Some found despair there, but others, surprisingly, found freedom. Ancient encounters with emptiness. Let's travel back for a moment. Not in any jarring way, but slowly, like watching the sunset and imagining all the other sunsets that have happened before this one. Thousands of years ago, people looked up at the same stars you can see tonight. If the sky is clear where you are, they felt the same smallness, the same sense of being a tiny consciousness in an enormous cosmos, and they asked themselves, what am I in the face of all this vastness? Some of the earliest philosophers we know of wrestled with questions that sound very much like nihilism, even if they didn't use that word. They looked at the world and saw change, impermanence, and death everywhere, and they wondered, if everything passes away, if nothing lasts, then what's the point of any of it? In ancient Greece, there was a school of thought called Epicureanism. Now you might have heard the word Epicurean used to describe someone who loves pleasure and fine food, but the actual philosophy of Epicurus was quieter than that, and in some ways surprisingly close to what we're exploring tonight. Epicurus and the gods who don't care. Epicurus lived around 300 BCE on the coast of what is now Turkey and Greece. He taught in a garden, surrounded by students who lived simply and thought deeply about how to be happy in an uncertain world. Here's what Epicurus believed. The gods, if they exist at all, don't care about us. They're not watching. They're not judging. They're not going to punish you after you die, and they're not going to reward you either. For many people in his time, this was a shocking idea. Religion was everywhere. The gods were thought to be deeply involved in human affairs, causing storms and plagues, granting victories and punishments. But Epicurus said, no, the gods are indifferent, and death is nothing to fear, because when you die, you simply cease to exist. There's no afterlife, no eternal judgment, just the end of consciousness, as painless and simple as the nothingness before you were born. Now you might expect this to be a terrifying philosophy. If the gods don't care and death is the end, then what's left? But Epicurus thought this was deeply comforting. Because if there's no cosmic plan you need to fulfill, and no eternal punishment waiting for you, then you're free. Free to live simply. Free to enjoy small pleasures. Free to spend time with friends in a garden, talking and eating and watching the light change. The relief of smallness. Take a breath here. Feel your body against whatever surface is supporting you. Epicurus is offering us something important, something we'll return to throughout the night. He's saying, your life doesn't need to be grand or world-changing or cosmically significant. It just needs to be yours. The universe isn't asking anything of you. It doesn't have expectations. It doesn't have a scorecard. You're small, and that's okay. That's actually a kind of gift, because if you're small enough that the universe doesn't notice you, then you're also free enough to live without the weight of cosmic responsibility. You can rest in that smallness tonight. You can let it hold you the way darkness holds a single candle flame. The Stoics and acceptance. Around the same time Epicurus was teaching in his garden, another school of philosophy was developing. The Stoics. You've probably heard of them. The word Stoic has come to mean someone who doesn't show emotion, who stays calm in the face of difficulty. But ancient Stoicism was richer than that. It was a whole way of understanding the world and your place in it. The Stoics believed the universe was governed by reason, by a kind of divine logic they called the logos. Everything that happens for a reason, according to a rational order. Now this might sound like the opposite of nihilism. If everything happens for a reason, doesn't that mean life has meaning? Not quite. Because the Stoics also believed that this cosmic reason is completely beyond our control. We can't change it. We can't negotiate with it. We can't understand it fully. All we can do is accept it. And here's where the Stoics start to sound surprisingly similar to the nihilists. They taught that most of the things we think matter don't actually matter. Fame, wealth, other people's opinions, even our own comfort and pain, none of these things are truly good or bad. They're just neutral events in a universe that will continue on whether we approve or not. Marcus Aurelius, alone with his thoughts. One of the most famous Stoics was Marcus Aurelius. He was a Roman emperor, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world. But in his private writings, which were never meant to be published, he sounds very much like someone lying awake at night, wondering about the point of it all. He wrote to himself, "You have lived as a citizen in a great city. What does it matter whether for 5 years or 50? For what is according to nature is equal for everyone. Why then should you be distressed if you depart from the city not by a tyrant or an unjust judge, but by nature herself? In other words, you're going to die. Everyone dies. The length of your life doesn't really matter. What you accomplish doesn't change the fact that you'll return to the earth like everyone else." This could sound bleak. But Marcus was finding peace in it. He was reminding himself that the pressure to achieve, to be remembered, to make a mark on history, all of that pressure is self-imposed. Nature doesn't require it. The comfort of impermanence. Let your breathing slow down a little. Let your muscles soften. Marcus Aurelius, lying in his tent during a military campaign, or sitting alone in a palace, was practicing a kind of meditation on meaninglessness. He was reminding himself that he was tiny, that his reign would end, that his name would eventually be forgotten, and that this was okay. In fact, it was more than okay. It was the natural way of things. Fighting against it only caused suffering. The Stoics believed that peace comes from aligning yourself with reality, not with your wishes about reality. And reality, they observed, is impermanent. Everything changes, everything passes, everyone dies. So instead of raging against this, instead of trying to build monuments that will last forever, why not just let go? Why not accept that you're here for a brief moment, like a wave rising and falling in an ocean, and that the ocean will continue long after your particular wave has dissolved back into it? A quiet aside. We're moving slowly tonight, and that's intentional. If you've been listening closely, you might have noticed that we're not building toward a big conclusion. We're just wandering through different rooms in the same house, the house of meaninglessness, seeing how different people have furnished those rooms. Some, like Epicurus, filled the rooms with gardens and friendship. Others, like Marcus Aurelius, filled them with discipline and acceptance. We'll visit more rooms as the night goes on, but there's no hierarchy here. No one answer is better than another. They're just different ways of sitting with the same fundamental question. If life doesn't have built-in meaning, what do we do? Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities. Before we move forward in time, there's one more ancient voice worth visiting. It comes from a surprising place, the Bible. The book of Ecclesiastes is strange and melancholy. It doesn't sound like most religious texts. It sounds like someone who has tried everything: pleasure, wisdom, work, wealth, and found all of it ultimately empty. The famous phrase from Ecclesiastes is, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. In the original Hebrew, the word translated as vanity is hevel, which means something like vapor, or breath, or mist, something insubstantial, something that disappears. The writer of Ecclesiastes looks at human life and sees hevel everywhere. We work hard, we build things, we try to be wise, and then we die, and someone else inherits what we made, and eventually they die too, and none of it lasts. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun, the writer asks. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The peace in futility. Now, Ecclesiastes is part of religious scripture, so it does eventually circle back to faith in God. But the bulk of the book is just this sustained meditation on futility, on the fact that nothing we do really matters in the grand scheme of things. And yet, there's something almost peaceful in the way it's written. The writer isn't screaming or despairing. He's just observing, noting the way things are. And in that observation there's a kind of rest. If everything is hevel, mist, vapor, then you don't need to cling so tightly to any of it. You can hold your achievements and your failures lightly, knowing that they'll both dissolve eventually. You can eat and drink and find enjoyment in your work, not because it matters eternally, but because it's pleasant right now, in this moment, before the mist fades. Breathing in the mist. Let's pause again. Notice the darkness around you, if it's dark where you are. Notice how soft it is, how it doesn't demand anything from you. We've been visiting ancient voices, people who lived thousands of years ago, and yet their thoughts feel strangely close, because the question they were asking is the same question that might have brought you here tonight. What does it all mean? And if it doesn't mean anything, how do we live? The ancient answers we've explored so far share something in common. They all suggest that acceptance is key, accepting that you're small, accepting that you're temporary, accepting that the universe doesn't revolve around you, and in that acceptance there's a kind of comfort, a softening, a release of tension. Eastern philosophies and the void. Now we're going to drift eastward for a while, not geographically exactly, but philosophically. We're going to spend some time with traditions that emerged in India and China, traditions that encountered emptiness and meaninglessness in their own ways, often centuries before Western philosophy started using words like nihilism. If your eyes are getting heavy, that's okay. Let them close if they want to. The words will still be here, moving through the darkness like a slow river. Buddhism and the teaching of no self. Around 500 BCE, in what is now Nepal and northern India, a man named Siddhartha Gautama sat down beneath a tree and decided not to get up until he understood the nature of suffering. According to tradition, he sat there for days. And what he realized, what became the foundation of Buddhism, was this: suffering comes from attachment, from clinging, from the belief that there is a permanent self that needs to be protected and satisfied and made happy. But that permanent self, the Buddha taught, is an illusion. When you look closely at your experience, when you really pay attention to what's happening in your mind and body from moment to moment, you don't find a solid, unchanging self. You find a constantly shifting stream of sensations, thoughts, feelings, all arising and passing away. There's no one home, in a sense, no central control room where you sit and operate the machinery of your life. Just processes, flowing, changing, dissolving. The liberating emptiness. This might sound like nihilism. If there's no self, then who are you? If your identity is just a collection of temporary processes, then what does your life mean? But the Buddha didn't present this as a tragedy. He presented it as liberation. Because if there's no permanent self, then there's also no self that can be truly harmed. No self that needs to be endlessly defended and promoted and worried about. All the anxiety you feel about who you are, about whether you're good enough, about what other people think of you, all of that anxiety is built on a misunderstanding. It's built on the belief that there's a solid you that could be damaged or diminished. But if you're already empty, if you're already just a flowing process, then what is there to protect? You can rest in that emptiness. You can let it hold you the way water holds a leaf that has fallen into a stream. Anatta, the doctrine of no self. The Buddhist term for this teaching is anatta, which means not self or non-self. It's one of the central teachings of Buddhism, and it's meant to be not just an intellectual idea, but something you experience directly through meditation. When you sit quietly and watch your thoughts arise and pass away, when you notice how sensations come and go, when you see how your sense of I is actually constructed moment by moment out of memories and reactions and stories, when you see all of this clearly, the tight grip of self begins to loosen, and in that loosening, there's peace. Not because you've found some great meaning or purpose, but because you've stopped frantically searching for one. You've stopped trying to make a permanent self out of impermanent materials. Sunyata, emptiness itself. As Buddhism developed, particularly in the Mahayana tradition, the teaching of emptiness deepened. There's a concept called sunyata, which means emptiness or voidness. Sunyata doesn't just mean that the self is empty. It means that everything is empty. Every object, every idea, every experience, all of it is empty of inherent independent existence. Things only exist in relationship to other things. A flower exists in relationship to soil, water, sunlight, the concept of flower, the person looking at it. Take away all those relationships, and what is the flower in itself? Nothing. It's empty. This sounds abstract, and it is. But here's the emotional core of it. If everything is empty, then nothing has to be any particular way. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is solid. The life you're living right now, the problems you're facing, the identity you think you have, all of it is more fluid, more changeable than it appears. And that fluidity means you're not trapped, not by circumstances and not by yourself. The Tao and the way of no way. Let's shift slightly. From India to China, from Buddhism to Taoism. Taoism is harder to summarize than Buddhism, partly because it deliberately resists being summarized. The most famous Taoist text, the Tao Te Ching, begins with the line, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." In other words, the moment you try to pin down the truth with words, you've already lost it. The Tao is sometimes translated as the way, but it's not a path you follow. It's more like the underlying nature of reality itself, the way water flows, the way seasons change, the way things arise and pass away without effort or intention. Taoism teaches that trying to control life, trying to impose meaning or order or purpose on it, is like trying to straighten a river. You'll exhaust yourself, and the river will keep flowing however it wants to flow anyway. Wu Wei, effortless action. There's a Taoist concept called Wu Wei, which is often translated as non-action or effortless action. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting in harmony with the natural flow of things, rather than forcing and striving and grasping. Imagine you're floating in water. If you panic and thrash around, you'll tire yourself out and sink. But if you relax, if you let the water hold you, you'll float effortlessly. Wu Wei is like that. It's the art of living without the constant tension of trying to make your life mean something it doesn't already mean. You don't have to force significance onto your existence. You can just exist, the way a tree exists, the way a stone exists, the way a cloud exists, not asking why, not needing to justify itself, just being. Rest in the flow. Your breath is still moving in and out, without you having to think about it. Your heart is still beating. These things happen on their own, without effort, without needing to mean anything. You can let your life be like that too, at least for tonight. You don't have to figure anything out. You don't have to achieve any particular insight. You can just rest in the flow of these words, in the flow of your own breathing, in the flow of time passing softly through the dark. The Taoists would say that this rest, this letting go, is actually closer to truth than any amount of striving could ever be. Zhuangzi's dream. There's a famous story from the Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi. He wrote about a dream he had, where he was a butterfly fluttering around, happy and free, with no awareness that he was Zhuangzi. Then he woke up and found himself back in his human body. And he asked, was I a man dreaming I was a butterfly? Or am I now a butterfly dreaming that I'm a man? The point isn't to answer the question. The point is to notice how uncertain everything is, how fluid identity is, how little we actually know about what we are or why we're here. And instead of finding that terrifying, Zhuangzi seems to find it playful, light-hearted even. If you don't know whether you're a man or a butterfly, then you're free from the burden of having to be definitively one thing or another. You can just float between possibilities, the way you might float between waking and sleeping right now, not quite in one state or the other. The gentle darkness of emptiness. All of these Eastern traditions, Buddhism, Taoism, and others we could mention if we had even more time together, share something important with the nihilism and absurdism we'll explore later. They all acknowledge that life might not have the kind of solid, pre-given meaning that we sometimes desperately want it to have. But instead of treating that as a dead end, they treat it as an opening, a space of possibility, a liberation from the exhausting work of trying to be something permanent in an impermanent world. You can feel that liberation in your body if you let yourself. Feel how you don't have to hold yourself together so tightly. Feel how you can soften, dissolve a little, let the boundaries between you and the darkness blur. You're still here, but you're here more lightly, more gently, with less weight. Moving through time. We're going to start moving forward through history now, but slowly, so you don't feel jolted. We're going to leave the ancient world behind and drift toward modernity, toward the moment when nihilism became a named philosophy, a conscious confrontation with meaninglessness. But before we do, let's just rest for a moment with everything we've touched on so far. Epicurus in his garden reminding us that the gods dawn to care, and death is nothing to fear. Marcus Aurelius in his tent, accepting that he's small and temporary and that this is okay. The Buddha under the tree, realizing that the self is empty and that emptiness is freedom. Zhuangzi dreaming of butterflies, letting identity blur and shift without anxiety. All of these voices are saying in different ways, you don't have to carry the weight of cosmic significance. You can put it down. You can rest. The turn toward modernity. Time keeps moving, the way it always does. Centuries pass, empires rise and fall. The world changes in countless ways, but the question of what it all means, remains. By the time we reach the 18th and 19th centuries in Europe, something has shifted. The old certainties, the religious frameworks that once gave structure and meaning to people's lives, are beginning to crack. Science is explaining more and more of the natural world without needing to invoke God. Political revolutions are challenging the divine right of kings. Philosophers are asking, what if everything we've been told about the purpose of life was just a story we told ourselves to feel safe? What if there's no higher plan, no cosmic justice, no ultimate meaning waiting to be discovered? This is the soil in which nihilism, as a formal philosophical movement, begins to grow. The death of God. If you know anything about nihilism, you've probably heard the phrase, God is dead. It comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, a German philosopher writing in the late 19th century. But Nietzsche didn't mean that God literally died. He meant that the idea of God, the framework of Christian morality and meaning that had structured European life for over 1,000 years, was no longer believable for many people. And this, Nietzsche thought, was a catastrophe. Not because he wanted people to believe in God, Nietzsche himself didn't, but because he understood how much people had relied on that belief to give their lives meaning. Without God, what's left? Without heaven and hell, without divine commandments, without the promise that suffering has a purpose and virtue will be rewarded, what reason is there to do anything at all? Nietzsche's worry. Nietzsche worried that when people realized God was dead, they would fall into what he called passive nihilism, a kind of exhausted despair, a sense that nothing matters, so why bother? He imagined people drifting through life without passion, without values, without the will to create or strive or affirm anything, just going through the motions, numb and hollow. And he saw signs of this everywhere in the culture around him. People clinging to old religious forms without really believing in them, people pursuing pleasure or wealth or status without any deeper conviction, just because they didn't know what else to do. For Nietzsche, this passive nihilism was a danger, a kind of spiritual death. But he also thought there was another possibility. Active nihilism and creating meaning. Nietzsche distinguished between passive nihilism, which is giving up, and active nihilism, which is something very different. Active nihilism means looking directly at the absence of inherent meaning and saying, fine, there's no cosmic meaning, no values written into the structure of the universe, no God to tell me what's right and wrong, what's worthwhile and what isn't. So I'll create my own meaning. I'll decide for myself what's valuable. I'll become the author of my own existence. This is where Nietzsche's famous idea of the Übermensch or Overman comes from. The Übermensch is someone who has moved beyond traditional morality, beyond the need for external validation or cosmic purpose, and has taken full responsibility for creating their own values. It's a bold vision, a defiant vision, and it's very different from the quiet acceptance we encountered in ancient philosophy, the weight of freedom. But here's the thing Nietzsche understood. Creating your own meaning is hard. It's exhausting even. When there's no blueprint, no instruction manual for life, you have to figure everything out yourself. Every choice becomes weightier because there's no external standard to measure it against. And for people lying awake at night, people like you perhaps, listening to this in the dark, that kind of radical freedom can feel overwhelming. Nietzsche's answer is inspiring to some people. The idea that you can become the artist of your own life, that you can transform meaninglessness into creative possibility, that resonates with a certain kind of temperament. But it doesn't necessarily bring peace. It doesn't necessarily help you sleep. A softer approach. So let's step back from Nietzsche for a moment. Let's acknowledge his insights, that the old frameworks are crumbling, that we're living in a world without pre-given meaning. But let's set aside the heroic striving he demands, because tonight isn't about becoming an Übermensch. Tonight is about rest, about finding some way to be okay with uncertainty, with meaninglessness, without needing to conquer it or overcome it or transform it into something grand. Let your shoulders drop a little. Unclench your jaw if it's clenched. Feel the weight of your head sinking into your pillow. Nietzsche asked a lot of the people who came after him, but you don't have to answer his call right now. You can just notice that the old certainties are gone, and that this absence creates a kind of spaciousness, an empty space where you used to carry convictions you didn't really believe in, and that empty space, it turns out, weighs less than the convictions did. Schopenhauer and the will. Before Nietzsche, there was another German philosopher who deeply influenced him, Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer had a dark view of life. He believed that existence is fundamentally suffering, driven by a blind, irrational force he called the will. The will in Schopenhauer's philosophy is the underlying energy of the universe. It's the drive to survive, to reproduce, to keep existing. And it's blind. It has no purpose, no goal, no meaning. It just is. And we, as individual human beings, are expressions of this will. We're driven by desires and needs and cravings that we didn't choose and can't fully control. We want things. We pursue them. Sometimes we get them, and for a brief moment we feel satisfied. Then the satisfaction fades and we want something else. This cycle, Schopenhauer thought, is the structure of suffering. We're caught on a wheel of desire and temporary satisfaction and renewed desire over and over until we die. The escape through denial. Schopenhauer's solution was to try to escape the will, to deny it, to withdraw from desire as much as possible. He was influenced by Buddhism and Hinduism, and his prescription sounds a lot like renunciation. Stop wanting things. Stop striving. Contemplate art and beauty, which allow you to momentarily forget your individual desires and merge with something larger and more peaceful. Or, in the most extreme version, simply negate the will entirely. Let go of the drive to live. Accept death not as a tragedy but as a release. This is a bleak philosophy in many ways, and yet there's something in it that feels true to certain moods, certain moments. Haven't you felt it sometimes? The exhaustion of wanting, the way desire seems to create its own suffering, because as soon as you have what you wanted, you either start worrying about losing it, or you start wanting something else. Schopenhauer is saying that's not a personal failing. That's just how existence works. The universe is structured around a meaningless, endless wanting. Rest in the recognition, but here's the gentle paradox again. Recognizing that your desires are part of a blind, meaningless cosmic force can actually take some of the pressure off. You don't have to feel bad about wanting things. You don't have to feel bad about not having achieved some state of perfect contentment. You're just a wave in an ocean of will rising and falling, and there's nothing wrong with you for being what you are. And if you can see that clearly, if you can hold that thought lightly, then maybe just for tonight, you can let go of the striving a little. You can let the wave subside. Your breath is still moving, in and out. The will, if we want to use Schopenhauer's language, is still pushing your lungs to breathe, your heart to beat. But you don't have to do anything with that. You can just let it happen. The Russian nihilists. Nihilism as a word, as a label, became widely known in the 19th century, partly through Russian literature and political movements. In Russia, nihilism referred to a rejection of traditional authority, religious dogma, and social conventions. Russian nihilists were often young, radical, passionate people who wanted to tear down the old world and build something new. They believed that inherited values were worthless, that everything needed to be questioned and tested against reason and evidence. If something couldn't be justified rationally, it should be discarded. This was a revolutionary nihilism, a political nihilism. It wasn't about despair or meaninglessness in the cosmic sense. It was about refusing to accept what you were told, about demanding freedom and truth and authenticity. Turgenev's Bazarov. The character Bazarov in Ivan Turgenev's novel Fathers and Sons is one of the most famous portraits of a Russian nihilist. Bazarov is a medical student, a materialist, a man who believes only in what can be measured and tested. He has no patience for art, romance, traditional values, or anything that can't be explained by science. He's harsh, sometimes cruel, but also compelling. He represents a kind of intellectual honesty, a refusal to be comforted by illusions, and yet Turgenev doesn't present him as a hero. By the end of the novel, Bazarov is dead, and his nihilism seems less like strength and more like a kind of loneliness, a cutting away of connections, of meaning, until there's nothing left to hold on to. The danger of cutting too much away. This is one of the recurring tensions in nihilism. If you reject all inherited meaning, all tradition, all values that aren't self-created, you might end up very free. But you also might end up very alone. You might find yourself in a world that feels cold and empty because you've stripped away all the stories and rituals and connections that used to give it warmth. And this is where nihilism can become genuinely painful, not as an intellectual position, but as a lived experience. If you're lying there tonight feeling that coldness, feeling like the world is just matter in motion and your life is just a brief flicker of consciousness in an indifferent universe, that's real. That feeling is real, and it's okay to acknowledge it. We're not going to pretend it away. But we're also not going to stay in it forever. We're going to keep moving, keep exploring, until we find something that feels a little gentler. Existentialism. Meeting the absurd. We're going to shift now gently from nihilism toward a closely related movement, existentialism. Existentialism emerged in the 20th century, particularly in France in the aftermath of 2 world wars. It was a philosophy born partly from trauma, from the experience of seeing civilization collapse into violence and chaos, and asking, what do we do now? What can we believe in when everything has fallen apart? The existentialists accepted many of the insights of nihilism. They agreed that there's no inherent meaning in the universe, no cosmic plan, no God writing the script of your life. But they focused on a different question. Given that there's no pre-existing meaning, how do we live? What does it feel like to be a conscious being in a meaningless world? And what possibilities does that create? Existence precedes essence. One of the central ideas of existentialism, particularly in the work of Jean-Paul Sartre, is the phrase existence precedes essence. What does that mean? It means that you exist first as a concrete being, here in the world, breathing and thinking and acting, and only afterward do you create your essence, your identity, your values, your meaning. There's no blueprint for what a human being should be. There's no instruction manual. You're not created with a purpose the way a knife is created for cutting, or a clock is created for telling time. You just are, and then you decide, through your choices and actions, what you're going to make of that existence. This is both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it means you're radically responsible for who you become. You can't blame God or fate or your circumstances. You're free, and that freedom is a burden. But it's also liberating because it means you're not trapped. You're not destined to be any particular thing. You can always choose differently. You can always recreate yourself. Sartre and Bad Faith Sartre had a concept called bad faith, which refers to the ways we try to escape from our freedom. We tell ourselves, I have to do this job because I need the money. I have to stay in this relationship because I've invested so much time. I have to be the person everyone expects me to be because that's who I am. But Sartre would say, no, you're choosing to do those things. You could choose otherwise. You might not like the consequences of choosing otherwise, but the choice is still there. Bad faith is when we pretend we don't have that choice. When we treat ourselves as objects, as things with fixed natures, rather than as free beings who are constantly creating themselves. And Sartre thought this was a kind of lie we tell ourselves to avoid the anxiety of freedom, the weight of responsibility. But here's the hard part. If you're truly free, if every moment is a choice, then you're responsible for everything you do. You can't hide behind excuses. You can't say, I had no choice. And that's exhausting. That's part of what Sartre called anguish, the feeling of being responsible for your own existence, without any guidelines or guarantees. If you've ever felt paralyzed by a decision, not because the options were unclear, but because you knew that whatever you chose would define you, would become part of who you are, that's the kind of anxiety Sartre is talking about. It's the vertigo of freedom. A gentler thought. Let's soften this a little because Sartre's existentialism can feel relentless. It demands so much of you. It asks you to be the author of your life every single moment with no rest. But maybe tonight you don't need to author anything. Maybe you can just be, without choosing, without creating, without taking on the weight of radical freedom. Your breath is still happening. Your body is still here. And none of that requires a decision from you. You can rest in the simple fact of existing, just for now, without worrying about essence or identity or meaning. The existentialists are right that you have freedom. But part of that freedom is the freedom to not decide everything tonight, to let some questions remain unanswered, to drift. Camus and the absurd. Now we come to Albert Camus, and with him we arrive at the heart of what's called Absurdism. Camus was a French-Algerian writer and philosopher, and his work is deeply concerned with the feeling of absurdity, the feeling that life doesn't make sense, that the world is silent when we ask it for meaning. Camus described the absurd as the confrontation between our human need for clarity, for purpose, for rational order, and the unreasonable silence of the world. We want life to mean something. We want our suffering to have a purpose, our efforts to lead somewhere, our existence to matter. But the universe doesn't answer. It doesn't provide meaning. It doesn't even acknowledge the question. And this gap, this mismatch, is the absurd. The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus explored the absurd most famously in an essay called The Myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is a figure from Greek mythology who was punished by the gods. His punishment was to roll a boulder up a mountain, and every time he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down, and he would have to start over. Forever. It's a perfect image of futility, of meaningless effort, of work that never accomplishes anything. And Camus asks, is Sisyphus's situation really so different from ours? We get up every day, we work, we build things, we pursue goals, and then we die. And whatever we built eventually crumbles, and the world continues without us. Over and over, generation after generation, pushing the boulder up the mountain, imagining Sisyphus happy. But here's where Camus does something unexpected. At the end of the essay he writes, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? How could Sisyphus possibly be happy, condemned to eternal meaningless labor? Camus suggests that once Sisyphus fully accepts the absurdity of his situation, once he stops hoping for the boulder to stay at the top, once he stops looking for some cosmic justification for his task, he becomes free. Free from illusion, free from false hope, free from the need for his life to be anything other than what it is. And in that freedom, there's a kind of happiness, not joy exactly, but a quiet defiance, a refusal to be crushed by the absurdity of existence. Sisyphus owns his fate. He continues pushing the boulder not because it will accomplish anything, but because it's his boulder, his mountain, his life. The comfort of defiance. There's something strangely comforting in this image once you sit with it for a while. You don't have to succeed. You don't have to make your life mean something in the eyes of the universe. You don't have to win or achieve or leave a legacy. You just have to keep going in your own way, for your own reasons or for no reason at all. And there's a dignity in that, a quiet strength. Camus isn't asking you to be heroic. He's just asking you to accept what is, without resentment, without bitterness, to say yes to life, even when life doesn't make sense. Revolt, freedom, passion. Camus identified three responses to the absurd: revolt, freedom, and passion. Revolt doesn't mean violence or anger. It means refusing to accept any false solutions to the absurd. Refusing to leap into faith or to pretend that life has a meaning it doesn't have, or to escape into distraction. It means staying awake to the absurdity, confronting it directly. Freedom comes from that confrontation. When you're no longer trying to find or create some ultimate meaning, when you've accepted that the search is futile, you're free to live without the weight of cosmic expectations. And passion is what you do with that freedom. You engage with life. You experience it fully. You love, you create, you feel. Not because it will lead to some grand conclusion, but because it's what's here now, in this brief moment you have. Breathing in the absurd. Take a slow breath in. Hold it for just a moment, then let it go. That breath doesn't mean anything. It's not accomplishing some greater purpose, but it's still yours. It's still real. It still feels like something. Camus would say that's enough. The feeling, the experience, the moment, that's enough. You don't need to justify your existence. You don't need to make it add up to something. You can just be here, breathing, existing, for as long as you exist and then not existing, and that's okay. The absurdity isn't something to fix. It's something to live with, lightly, the way you'd live with the sound of rain outside your window. It's just the background of existence. Camus in Suicide. Camus opened The Myth of Sisyphus with a stark sentence. There is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. He meant, if life is absurd, if it has no meaning, then why continue living? It's a dark question. But Camus' answer is clear. Suicide is not a solution to the absurd. In fact, it's a kind of surrender, It's letting the absurdity win. The truly rebellious act, the act of defiance, is to keep living, to acknowledge that life is meaningless and to say, fine, I'll live it anyway. Not out of hope that it will eventually make sense, but out of sheer presence, out of a commitment to experiencing what's here, even if it's absurd. A thought for the night. If you're lying here tonight feeling the weight of absurdity, feeling like your life doesn't add up to anything coherent or meaningful, Camus is offering you a strange kind of permission. You don't have to make it add up. You can let it be incoherent. You can let it be small and ordinary and ultimately forgettable. And you can still find something worth living for in the texture of the moment, in the way the darkness feels, in the way your body rests, in the simple fact that you're here, now, aware of being here. That awareness, fleeting and meaningless as it might be, is still something. And for tonight, it's enough. Existential nihilism. No objective meaning. By now, the idea has appeared in many forms, from many directions. The universe does not come with built-in meaning. It does not hand us a purpose. It does not tell us what we are or what we should do. Existential nihilism gives that idea a clear, simple name. It is the view that life has no objective meaning or purpose. No action you take has inherent significance. No event, on its own, contains a deeper cosmic message. From the perspective of existential nihilism, all the stories humans tell about destiny, about ultimate justice, about being chosen or guided or watched over, are just that, stories. Beautiful sometimes, comforting sometimes, but not literally true. If this sounds like what we've already been circling around, that's because it is. Existential nihilism is a way of summarizing the atmosphere we've been breathing together. A world without guaranteed meaning, inhabited by beings who desperately want meaning anyway. The honesty of the void. One of the things that makes existential nihilism compelling to some people is its honesty. Instead of clinging to comforting illusions, instead of insisting that everything happens for a reason when it clearly doesn't, existential nihilism says, let's tell the truth. Let's admit that our lives, viewed from a cosmic perspective, are brief and insignificant. The Earth is a small planet orbiting an average star in a vast galaxy among billions of galaxies. Our species has existed for a tiny fraction of the age of the universe. Each individual life is a moment within that fraction. From that vantage point, nothing we do seems to matter. Civilizations rise and fall. Languages appear and disappear. Names that were once famous become footnotes, then vanish entirely. Existential nihilism doesn't hide from this. It looks directly at it. And for some people that directness is a relief. There's no more pretending. No more trying to force your life to fit into a narrative of cosmic importance. You can stop lying to yourself. You can stop waiting for the universe to reveal a plan it doesn't have. Emotional waves of nihilism. But honesty alone doesn't make something easy to live with. The realization that life has no objective meaning can produce a range of emotions. Sometimes there's anger, a sense of betrayal. Why were we given this hunger for meaning if there's nothing to satisfy it? Why were we told stories about purpose and destiny, only to discover that they were illusions? Sometimes there's anxiety. If nothing matters, then what should I do? How do I choose anything when no choice is better in any ultimate sense? Sometimes there's depression. If nothing matters, what is the point of even getting out of bed? Why try? Why care? Nihilism doesn't create these emotions. It just names them. It acknowledges them. It gives us a way to talk about the pain of living in a world where the old promises of meaning have broken down. Lowering the stakes, and yet nestled inside this bleak picture, there's a tiny, quiet gift. When nothing is objectively meaningful, the stakes of your life are lower than you might have thought. If there's no eternal scoreboard, no ultimate evaluation of your choices, then you can't really fail in the way you might have feared. You can make mistakes. You can change your mind. You can drift. You can spend a whole day doing nothing in particular. None of it is being graded. Of course, your actions still have consequences for you and for others. Pain and joy are still real at the level of experience, but there's no cosmic judge watching. No final exam at the end of your life. Some people feel this as a loosening, a softening, a chance to breathe. You don't have to get life right. There is no right in that absolute sense. There is only what feels kind, what feels honest, what feels bearable here and now. Subjective meaning, small lights in a dark sky. Even the most thorough descriptions of existential nihilism often include a small opening, a little doorway back into meaning. They say, life has no objective meaning, but that doesn't mean you can't experience meaning. It doesn't mean you can't create it, or notice it, or feel it. Think of meaning as light in a dark sky. The darkness is the universe, vast and indifferent. The light is the feeling you get when you hear a song that moves you, or hold someone's hand, or watch the way the light falls on a wall in the late afternoon. That light doesn't come from the structure of reality itself. It comes from you, from your nervous system, from your history and your personality and your moods, from the way certain patterns of experience resonate with you. Existential nihilism says those lights are real as experiences. They're not illusions, even if they're not anchored in any cosmic order. You can't prove that your love for someone matters to the universe, but you don't have to. It matters to you. It matters to them. And that might be enough. Meaning as a feeling, not a fact. One way to soften nihilism is to shift how we talk about meaning. Instead of treating meaning as a fact, something that can be true or false, like the earth orbits the sun, we can treat it as a feeling, a sense of significance, a sense of connection, a sense that something is worth paying attention to, worth caring about. From this perspective, asking, does life have meaning, is a bit like asking, does music have beauty? There's no objective answer written into the structure of reality, but that doesn't stop you from feeling the beauty when you listen. Meaning becomes something lived, not something proven. It rises and falls, depending on your mood, your circumstances, your relationships. It can be quiet or intense, steady or fleeting. It doesn't need to be permanent. It doesn't need to be universal. When you treat meaning this way, the starkness of nihilism softens. Yes, life has no objective meaning, but that doesn't cancel out the moments when life feels meaningful. It just means those moments are fragile, local, human, and maybe that fragility makes them more precious, not less. Embracing or simply noticing meaninglessness. There's a phrase that appears often in discussions of absurdism and nihilism, embracing meaninglessness. It can sound like a big dramatic act, as if you're supposed to stand on a cliff in the wind and declare to the universe that you accept its emptiness. But in practice, it can be much smaller, much gentler. You don't have to embrace meaninglessness. You can just notice it. You can notice that your attempts to find a grand purpose keep running into dead ends. You can notice that the stories you were given as a child no longer fit the way the world appears to you now. You can let that noticing be what it is, a quiet recognition. And then you can turn your attention back to the small, immediate textures of your life, the feeling of fabric against your skin, the rhythm of your breath, the sound of this voice in your ears. Meaninglessness is a backdrop, not a prison. It's the canvas, not the painting. Psychological gentle handling. People who write about nihilism and absurdism sometimes point out that these ideas can make existing mental suffering sharper, especially depression or anxiety. If you're already feeling hopeless, the thought that nothing matters can feel like confirmation. If you're already anxious, the thought that there are no guidelines for how to live can deepen the panic. But the same ideas, approached slowly and kindly, can also relieve certain kinds of suffering. If you felt crushed by the pressure to find your purpose, nihilism can whisper, what if there is no single purpose you were meant to discover? If you felt guilty for not living up to expectations, absurdism can say, those expectations were invented by other humans, just as confused as you are. If you felt like a failure for not feeling constantly fulfilled and passionate, existentialism can reassure you. There is no rule that says you must feel that way. There is no judge keeping score. Nihilism doesn't have to be a weapon turned against yourself. It can be a softening of the rules, a loosening of the grip of should, a refrain for the night. we can come back again and again to a simple refrain. Life might not have a built-in meaning. You do not have to find one tonight. You are allowed to be here, exactly as you are, even if nothing makes sense. Nothing in the universe is demanding that you justify your existence. No one is standing at the edge of your bed with a clipboard, waiting for you to explain why you deserve to be alive. You don't have to explain anything. You don't have to earn your place. You are already here. That's the starting point. That's enough. Letting meaning be small. As the night goes on, you might find your thoughts drifting to small things, a memory of someone who was kind to you, a fragment of a song, the smell of a particular room from your childhood. These small things are not answers to the question of life's ultimate meaning. They don't solve anything, but they are your life. They are pieces of the only existence you actually have, this one, with its particular textures and colors and sounds. Nihilism says there's no objective meaning. Absurdism says the universe is silent in the face of our questions, but neither of them can take away the way it feels to remember a moment of warmth or to imagine a future moment of peace. Those feelings are not lies. They're not proofs of some higher order. They're just part of what it means to be a human animal, briefly awake in a vast, indifferent cosmos. And for tonight, that can be enough to rest in. Everyday nights with the void. So far we've moved through history and ideas. We've walked alongside philosophers and traditions. But philosophy, especially at night, always comes back to something very simple. The feeling of being you, not the idea of you, not your story or your identity or your plans. Just the immediate, quiet feeling of being here. Nihilism and absurdism might sound like big, abstract themes, but they show up in very ordinary moments. Moments you probably know well. Lying in bed after a long day, scrolling through your phone, seeing images of other people's lives. Vacations, achievements, smiles, opinions, drama. After a while, all of it blurs together. It feels strangely hollow. You put the phone down and stare at the ceiling. A thought appears, almost without words. What am I doing? What is any of this? Or maybe it's a Sunday afternoon. The light is gray. You have nothing urgent to do. You wander from room to room, not quite able to settle. Part of you thinks you should be productive. Another part of you feels tired, uninterested, blank. Underneath both parts is a quiet unease. Does any of this matter? These moments are not failures. They're not glitches. They're natural encounters with the question of meaning. The question that nihilism and absurdism take seriously instead of trying to quickly soothe away. Quiet loneliness. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with thinking about meaninglessness. It's not just being alone in a room. It's feeling alone in a universe. Feeling like your thoughts about existence are too heavy, too strange to share with anyone else. You might have tried once or twice to bring up these questions with friends or family. Maybe they changed the subject. Maybe they tried to cheer you up or reassure you. Maybe they told you not to think so much. So the questions went back inside. They joined you at night instead when no one else was around. Absurdism begins right there, in that quiet loneliness, in that feeling of being a small, questioning creature in a world that doesn't answer. It doesn't say you're strange for feeling this way. It doesn't say you're broken. It says, yes, this is how it is to be human. And in that recognition, you are less alone. Nothing. You have to think for a moment about all the invisible demands that have been placed on you over the years. Be successful. Be interesting. Be kind. Be productive. Be strong. Be independent. Be in a relationship. Be stable. Be improving yourself. Be happy. These demands come from many places: family, culture, media, school. After a while, they sink in so deeply that they feel like reality itself, as if the universe is the one insisting that you live up to them. Nihilism quietly removes that illusion. The universe is not demanding that you be anything in particular. It isn't keeping track of your productivity. It isn't evaluating your personality. It isn't comparing you to anyone else. All of those pressures are human inventions, social constructions, stories we've told ourselves to structure life, to organize societies, to motivate behavior. They can be useful sometimes. They can also be crushing. Absurdism doesn't tell you to ignore them completely, but it gives you permission to see them as optional, as overlays, not as the ground of reality. You are not failing the universe. The universe has no expectations of you. A tiny room, a vast universe. Imagine for a moment a small room. It could be your room, a bed, a few objects, maybe some soft light. This little space is where your consciousness is unfolding right now. Outside that room is your building. Outside the building is your neighborhood. Outside the neighborhood is your city. Outside the city is your country. Outside the country is the planet. Outside the planet is space, expanding in all directions, all. From the standpoint of the cosmos, your room is nothing, less than nothing, a speck on a speck on a speck, and yet, from your standpoint, your room is everything. It's the entire theater of experience right now. All of your sensations, thoughts, and feelings are happening within this tiny, fragile space. Nihilism says, in the big picture, your room doesn't matter. It will exist for a while and then it won't. You will exist for a while and then you won't. But here's the strange comfort. Because the big picture is so vast, it does not care what happens in this room. It imposes no script. You are free in this tiny room to feel what you feel, to think what you think, without needing it to echo through eternity. You can let this moment be small. You can let it be ordinary. You can let it be enough. Refrain. No ultimate test. Let's repeat a gentle refrain, slowly. There is no ultimate test. There is no final score. There is no cosmic report card waiting to be handed to you at the end of your life. There is this breath. There is this body. There is this moment of awareness moving through the dark. Everything else, success, failure, identity, story, is layered on top. Sometimes helpful, sometimes painful, always temporary. You can let those layers sit off to the side for a while, like clothes hanging on a chair at the end of the day. You don't need to wear them all the time. You can just be here without them. When nothing matters, small things can people sometimes misunderstand nihilism as saying, because nothing matters in the big sense, nothing matters at all. But there's another way to hear it. If nothing matters absolutely, then you are free to let small things matter in a gentle, local way. The warmth of a blanket, the sound of rain on a window, the presence of a pet sleeping nearby, a memory of someone who once looked at you with genuine kindness, a sentence in a book that made you feel seen. None of these things change the structure of the universe. None of them solve the problem of meaning. But they are experiences. They are real in the only sense that matters to you as a conscious being. They are felt. You don't need them to be part of a grand design. You can let them be small and still let them soothe you. The gentle art of lowering demands. Sometimes, without even noticing, we demand that life be something other than what it is. We demand that it make sense, that it reward goodness and punish cruelty, that it recognize effort, that it feel meaningful and coherent. When it doesn't, we feel betrayed. Nihilism and absurdism suggest a different approach. What if we lower our demands? Not in a cynical way, not in a nothing matters so I don't care way, but in a quiet, realistic way. What if we stop insisting that life provide what it cannot provide? What if we stop asking the universe to be a comforting story and simply let it be what it is, vast, largely indifferent, partially knowable, fleeting? When you lower that demand, a certain kind of struggle eases. The struggle of trying to force reality to be kinder, clearer, more meaningful than it is. You don't have to stop wanting kindness, clarity, or meaning. You can still create them in small circles, in human ways. But you no longer have to be at war with the basic structure of existence. You and the universe don't have to be in conflict. Holding both emptiness and care. Here's an important tender point. Recognizing that life has no inherent meaning does not require you to stop caring. You can know intellectually. that your relationships won't last forever, that your projects are temporary, that your name will one day be forgotten, and you can still feel love, still feel responsibility, still feel moved to kindness. In fact, sometimes the awareness of impermanence makes care deeper. If this moment is fleeting, that doesn't make it worthless. It makes it fragile. And fragile things often feel more precious. A glass that can never break is not cherished the way a delicate one is. A life that could never end would not be felt the way a finite one is. Nihilism doesn't erase your capacity for love or compassion. It just removes the illusion that those things are guaranteed or required by the universe. You can still choose them, not because you must, but because you can. Soft recap in the dark. Let's gently gather some of the threads that have been weaving through this night. We've heard that life has no built-in objective meaning. The universe is vast and mostly indifferent to our existence. Our desire for meaning clashes with this indifference. That clash is the absurd. Philosophers and traditions across time have responded in many ways: acceptance, creation of values, renunciation, rebellion, presence. Beneath all of these different responses, there is a shared recognition. You are a small, temporary being, awake for a brief time in a reality that does not revolve around you. This recognition can hurt. It can also heal. It can strip away fantasies that never truly comforted you and leave something simpler, quieter, easier to carry. You are here. You do not know why. You do not need to know why to breathe, to rest, to sleep. Let the questions dim. The big questions. What is the meaning of life? What am I supposed to do? Does any of this matter? Are like bright lights pointed directly at your eyes. They are too intense to stare at for long. Absurdism doesn't say you should never look at them. It just says you cannot live in that brightness all the time. It's okay to let the questions dim. You don't have to solve them. You don't have to hold them. You can let them drift to the edges of your mind, like stars fading behind clouds. If an answer exists, it will not arrive tonight as a thunderclap. It will not arrive as a sudden, dramatic revelation. More likely it will appear again and again in small ways, in what you find yourself drawn to, in what softens you, in what feels honest and kind. You don't need to force that process. You can just live and notice. And right now you don't even have to notice. You can just rest. The cold comfort of nothing matters. There is a particular kind of comfort that nihilism seems to offer at first. It goes something like this: if nothing matters, then you don't have to care. If nothing matters, then you can't really fail. If nothing matters, then all this pressure you feel, from society, from others, from yourself, loses its force. This can feel like a release, especially when life has been hard for a long time, when hopes have fallen through, when promises, religious or otherwise, have turned out to be empty, when you're tired of being told that everything happens for a reason and your experience whispers that sometimes things just happen. Nihilism steps in and says, you're right. There is no hidden meaning behind your suffering. There is no guarantee that your pain will be redeemed or explained. That honesty can feel like cold water on your face, harsh but clarifying. Nihilism as a pause button. Some writers describe nihilism as a kind of reset to zero. If life has felt worse than zero, overwhelming, chaotic, full of demands you can't meet, nihilism offers a way to step out of all that, to say, none of this matters. I don't have to keep chasing anything. In that sense, nihilism can function like a pause button. It stops the frantic search for meaning. It stops the exhausting work of trying to make every experience add up to some coherent story. For a while, that pause can be restful. You're no longer struggling to climb a mountain whose summit keeps receding. You're just sitting down, breathing, not climbing at all. Tonight, you might be in that pause. You might be in a place where you can't believe in big meanings anymore, but you're not yet sure what comes after that. It's okay to be there. It's okay to rest there. When nothing matters hurts, but if you stay in that pause too long, it can become something else. Writers who explore nihilism from the inside often notice that it comes with familiar emotional patterns: rage, intellectualization, depression, anxiety. Rage. a defiant refusal to admit that anything could be meaningful because you've been hurt by past promises of meaning, intellectualization, using clever arguments to flatten every experience, to avoid feeling its emotional weight, depression, turning the negativity inward, numbing yourself so you don't have to engage with questions of meaning at all. Nihilism says you don't have to care, but the human heart keeps caring anyway, and that conflict can be painful. If you've ever thought, nothing matters but somehow I still hurt, you've already noticed this tension. The mind has decided that meaning doesn't exist. The emotions haven't agreed. Acceptance, both meaningless and meaningful. One helpful suggestion some philosophers and psychologists offer is this. Instead of choosing between everything has meaning and nothing has meaning, try accepting that both meaninglessness and meaningfulness coexist. The universe on the largest scale may well be indifferent. Stars are born, burn, and die without purpose. Species arise and vanish. Eventually everything we know will end. At that scale, meaning dissolves. But at the human scale, meaning appears and disappears all the time. Not as a cosmic property, but as a felt quality of experience. A conversation feels meaningful. A song feels meaningful. A quiet act of kindness feels meaningful. A memory feels meaningful. These meanings are not guaranteed. They're not permanent, they're not universal, but they're real as experiences. Acceptance in this context means allowing both truths. There is no ultimate, guaranteed, objective meaning. There are still local, fragile, subjective meanings that arise in living. You don't have to force either side to disappear. You can let the emptiness be there in the background, while also letting small meanings come and go in the foreground. Absurdism as a soft middle path. Absurdism can be seen as a gentle middle way between needing ultimate meaning and collapsing into total meaninglessness. It starts from three simple recognitions. We long for meaning. The universe does not provide it in any clear, objective way. This mismatches the absurd. Instead of denying that the longing exists, or pretending that the universe secretly fulfills it, absurdism says, let's live inside the tension. We acknowledge that life is irrational, unpredictable, and not designed for our comfort. And we still show up. We still live. We still care in our own ways. Some key themes of this gentle absurdist stance are revolt, not violent rebellion, but a quiet refusal to be crushed by meaninglessness. You continue to live and care, even without guarantees. Freedom. If nothing is inherently meaningful, you are free to shape your days without needing cosmic permission. Creation of meaning, not discovering a pre-written purpose, but allowing meaning to grow in the soil of your own experiences and choices. Absurdism doesn't tell you to pretend everything is fine. It doesn't tell you to stop seeing the void. It just suggests that you can look into the void and still decide gently, I will live anyway. Emotional resilience in an absurd world. Some therapists and writers have started to use absurdism as a way of talking about resilience. The idea is that when you accept life's unpredictability and lack of inherent meaning, you're less shocked when things don't go according to plan. You're less betrayed when life is unfair, because you never assumed it would be fair in the first place. This doesn't make pain pleasant. It doesn't make loss easy, but it can reduce a certain layer of extra suffering. The suffering of insisting that reality be something it has never promised to be. From this perspective, setbacks become part of the absurd texture of existence, not proof that you've failed some cosmic test. Uncertainty becomes something to live with, not something to eliminate. You can feel sadness, fear, or confusion without needing to wrap them in a larger story about fate or punishment. The world remains chaotic, but you become a little less fragile in the face of that chaos, because you're no longer waiting for it to resolve into a neat pattern. A small, practical compassion. When you strip away all the grand talk, what remains is something simple. You are a conscious being, briefly here. You live in a world that doesn't come with instructions. You feel things, you think things, you try. Nihilism in its harsh form says, none of this matters, so you might as well not care. A kinder response says, none of this matters in an ultimate cosmic sense, but it matters to you, and that is not nothing. You don't have to inflate your life into something grand. You don't have to pretend you're destined or chosen. You can let your existence be small, local, fragile, and still treat it with care. Tonight, that care can be very simple. Let your body rest. Let your thoughts wander without needing to follow them. Let the idea that nothing matters soften into nothing is demanded of me. You don't owe the universe a masterpiece. You don't owe anyone a grand explanation. You are allowed to simply be here in the dark, breathing, letting the mind grow. Quiet. We're getting closer now to the gentle end of this long drift through nihilism, absurdism, and the question of meaning. By this point, your mind may feel a little softer around the edges. Thoughts might be slower, less sharp. You might find yourself catching only fragments of sentences, floating in and out of attention. That is completely fine. This was never meant to be a lesson you had to follow from start to finish. It was meant to be more like weather, something happening around you while you rest. The ideas we've touched, meaninglessness, the absurd, the smallness of human life, can seem huge during the day. They can feel like cliffs, like abysses. At night, in this quiet, they can become more like distant landscapes, present but not immediate, interesting but not urgent. You don't have to keep thinking about them. You can let them fade to the background, like hills disappearing in the dark. The slow descent into simple being. Philosophers sometimes write about a descent into questioning, into the depths of doubt, into the recognition that old meanings are gone. Tonight, we've taken a kind of descent together, not into hell, not into horror, but into honesty. We've admitted that life has no guaranteed objective meaning. The universe doesn't answer when we ask it why we're here. Our search for meaning is something we bring to the world, not something the world owes us. Now, as we move towards sleep, there's another descent happening, a descent out of thinking and into simple being. You don't have to hold the concepts anymore. You don't have to remember who said what or which philosopher believed which idea. You can let all of that slide off your mind, like sand slipping back into the sea. What remains is very small, very simple. Breath, body, darkness, rest, acceptance without drama. Some writers suggest that the way out of the painful side of nihilism is acceptance. Acceptance of both the emptiness and the presence of meaning in different ways. But acceptance can sound like a big act, a decision you have to make and stick to. Tonight it can be much quieter. You don't have to declare that you accept anything. You don't have to reach a conclusion. You don't have to solve nihilism, absurdism, or your own life. All you need to do is stop fighting just for now. Stop fighting with the universe about what it should be. Stop fighting with your mind about what it should understand. Stop fighting with yourself about who you should be. Reality is what it is. You are who you are in this moment. That's all. You can let that be okay, or at least not a problem you have to fix tonight. No final answer needed. During the day, it can feel like you're supposed to arrive somewhere. A worldview, a belief system, a solid conclusion about the meaning of life. But the most honest voices across philosophies and traditions often admit the same thing in the end. There is no final, definitive answer that everyone must accept. We've seen the Stoics accepting nature's order without fully understanding it. The Buddhists embracing emptiness and no self. The existentialists insisting on freedom and self-created meaning. The absurdists acknowledging the silence of the universe and choosing to live anyway. None of them solve the mystery. They just offer different ways of living with it. You don't have to pick one tonight. You don't have to decide whether you're a nihilist, an absurdist, an existentialist, or anything at all. You can leave the question open. Let it rest on a shelf somewhere in your mind, like a book you don't need to read to the end right now. Softening. Around the void. The void, the sense of meaninglessness, emptiness, insignificance, can be sharp when you first encounter it. It can feel like a hole you might fall into. But over time, and especially in gentle moments like this, it can soften. Instead of a hole, it becomes a kind of spaciousness, because nothing is required of you by the universe. there is room. Room to breathe without being perfect. Room to exist without being important. Room to rest without having earned it. You are not standing on the edge of an abyss being judged. You are lying in a small, quiet space, held by gravity, surrounded by silence. The cosmos is unimaginably large. Your concerns compared to that are tiny. That disproportion can be frightening. It can also be a relief. Your worries do not echo across galaxies. They don't need to. They can be allowed to fade right here in this room without ceremony. A gentle return to the body. Let the ideas drift away now, like leaves carried off by a slow current. Bring your attention very softly back to your body. Notice the weight of your head. Notice the shape of your shoulders, the way they rise and fall when you breathe. Notice the contact between your body and the surface supporting you. There is no philosophy test hidden inside these sensations, no meaning to interpret. They are just simple facts of being alive. Breath moving in, breath moving out. You do not have to do this well. You do not have to focus perfectly. If your mind wanders, that's okay. If you drift in and out of these words, that's okay. Everything that needs to keep happening, breathing, circulation, the quiet work of cells, keeps happening on its own. You can let the body take care of living for a while the mind rests. Sleep as a small surrender. Some philosophers and contemplative traditions have noticed that sleep itself is a kind of surrender, a rehearsal in a tiny, harmless way for letting go. When you fall asleep, you release control. You let your sense of self dissolve for a while. You stop narrating your life. You stop worrying about its meaning. The world continues. Your body continues. But you, as the storyteller in your head, go quiet. There is a mercy in that. You don't have to be awake and responsible and reflective all the time. You don't have to hold your identity together every second of every day. Tonight, you can let sleep be what it is. Not an enemy of thought, but a gentle companion. A state where the demand for meaning is temporarily turned down. Like a light dimmed to almost nothing. You're allowed to go there. You're allowed to let go. You don't need all the answers tonight. If part of you is still holding on, still insisting on one more thought, one more insight, one more turn of the question, you can speak to that part gently. You don't need all the answers tonight. You don't need to fix your philosophy. You don't need to cure your doubt. You don't need to figure out what to do with your life. All of that will still be there tomorrow, if it needs to be. For now, the only task is rest. The only meaning you need is that you are tired and sleep is allowed. The universe doesn't demand anything else from you. It never did. Drifting away from words, soon the sentences may start to blur. You may find yourself catching only every other phrase, then every third, until the words become just a soft, unimportant sound in the background. That's how this is supposed to go. You are not meant to stay fully alert until the final line. You are meant to slip away whenever sleep arrives, without apology, without a formal closing. If you are still awake, you can simply let the following thoughts move past you like slow clouds. Nothing is required of you. You are allowed to exist without purpose. You are allowed to care, and you are allowed not to know why you care. You are allowed to rest in a world that does not revolve around you. In the end, maybe this is the quiet comfort at the heart of meaninglessness. You are free. Free from cosmic expectations. Free from the need to be extraordinary. Free even from understanding. There is just this small life, this brief awareness, this night, and right now, this breath. In, out. You can follow it down into sleep whenever you are ready, or whenever readiness stops being a question. There's nowhere else you have to be. Barely awake, still enough. If you are still here, still listening, you might notice that your mind is hovering in a soft in-between. Not fully awake, not fully asleep, just drifting. This too is a place where philosophy can sit quietly beside you. By now, the large ideas of nihilism and absurdism have settled into something gentler. Less like arguments, more like a mood. We've circled the same insights many times. Life has no guaranteed, objective meaning. The universe is vast and mostly indifferent. Our longing for meaning meets that indifference, and the result is the absurd. Even so, small subjective meanings appear, like little lights, and you are free to let them matter in their own way. There is nothing new you need to learn now, only a softness to sink into. A life without a final title. Sometimes people imagine their life as a book that will one day need a title, a clear theme, a moral. But most lives are more like a collection of pages with different tones, different moods, different scenes. No single phrase could capture all of it. Nihilism says the universe will never title your book for you. There will be no final verdict stamped across your story. Absurdism adds, and you don't have to. You are allowed to live and die without ever summarizing what it all was about. You can let your life remain partly unclassified, partly unresolved, like a song that fades out instead of ending on a perfect chord. Sleep, too, is like that. A gentle fade, not a conclusion, no audience. You must impress. One quiet comfort that keeps returning is this: there is no ultimate audience you must impress. Yes, there are people whose opinions matter to you, people you love, people you fear disappointing. That is real. But beyond that circle stretching out into the enormous universe, there is no tribunal watching you, no cosmic critic reviewing your performance. The stars are not judging you. The galaxies are not tracking your progress. Time itself is not demanding that you justify how you spend your hours. If you rest now, you are not letting down the universe. If you do nothing but breathe in this dark room, you are not failing your purpose. There is no requirement. Breath as the only task. Let everything else drop away for a moment. Plans, regrets, identities, questions. Leave them gently outside the door of this moment, like shoes you take off before entering a quiet room. What remains is only air entering your lungs, air leaving your lungs. You don't have to breathe mindfully. You don't have to do it right. You don't have to count or match a rhythm. Just notice every now and then that it's happening. Existential nihilism says there is no built-in purpose behind that breath. It doesn't serve a higher goal. It is simply part of what it means, physically, to still be here. You can let that be enough, not a stepping stone to something else, just itself. In, out, nothing to prove. A small, kind perspective. From the point of view of eternity, everything about your life is tiny. Every joy, every mistake, every thought you have ever had. And yet, from the point of view of your own experience, each of these can feel enormous. You don't need to decide which perspective is right. You can hold both, lightly. Cosmically, it will all pass and be forgotten. Personally, it still feels like something, and feelings matter at the scale of a human life. This double view can be kind. When pain feels too big, you can remember that it is small against the backdrop of time. When you feel small, you can remember that your feelings are still real to you, and that's not trivial. No philosophy can remove pain altogether, but it can sometimes make the room around it a little larger, a little more breathable. You have done enough for today. Whatever today was, busy, empty, successful, frustrating, this day is ending. The story of this particular day does not need a strong final sentence. It does not need to conclude with insight. It can end like this, with a tired body, with a mind that has thought enough, with a person who has done what they could, or maybe less than they hoped, and is still allowed to rest. There is no cosmic ledger where today's actions must be balanced before you're permitted to sleep. You do not need to earn the right to close your eyes. You have existed through another rotation of this planet. That is already more than enough. Let the concepts dissolve nihilism, absurdism, existentialism, meaning, void. These are just words, tools for pointing at certain experiences, certain feelings. You can imagine them now as chalk marks on a board, slowly being washed away by rain. The board remains, the basic fact of being alive. The marks come and go. As they fade, what's left is very plain. You are here. You are tired. You are allowed to stop thinking. No philosopher, ancient or modern, would object to you closing your eyes now. Every one of them slept too. Every one of them had nights when questions gave way to dreams. You are in good company. drifting off without a final thought. If your mind still wants one last clean idea to hold on to, you can offer it something very simple. Nothing has to mean anything, and still this moment can be gentle, that's all. You don't have to wrestle with that sentence. You don't have to believe it firmly. You can let it hover once and then pass. After that, there is no need for more words. Just this body in this room. Just this breath moving slowly. Just this night unfolding without a script. Whenever sleep comes, soon or in a little while, you don't have to greet it. You don't have to notice the exact moment you cross over. You can simply let go of the need to stay. Let the mind wander where it will. Let the body sink. Let the universe be vast and silent and unconcerned. Within that indifference, there is a small, quiet space where you are resting. Nothing more is needed. There's not much more that needs to be said now. We have walked a long, slow path together. Through nihilism, through absurdism, through the idea that life has no built-in meaning, and the gentler idea that this does not have to be a catastrophe. You have heard that. The universe is indifferent and there is no final script for you. Your longing for meaning meets that indifference, and that tension is the absurd. You are still free to live, to care, to rest, without any higher authority demanding a reason. By now these are no longer sharp ideas. They're more like a low, distant hum. You don't need to pick them up again tonight. You do not have to resolve the question of meaning, not in this life and certainly not in this moment. You can let the philosophies remain on the shelf like books gently closed. Right now, nothing is required of you except to exist, not to understand, not to improve, not to justify, just to be here as you are. The universe will go on being vast and silent. Thoughts will go on rising and fading. One night will go on turning into another. And you are allowed, in the middle of all of this, to do the simplest thing a living being can do. Close your eyes. Let your body grow heavy. Let the questions drift away. There is no final line, no grand conclusion. Only this quiet. You are here. You are safe enough for this moment. You don't need the answers tonight. You can let go. This is a good place to stop. The core thought has already unfolded, slowly and in many forms. Life may have no inherent, objective meaning, and yet you are still here, breathing, feeling, resting, and that is enough for tonight. There is no final insight missing, no last philosophical step you must take. The work of this audio is already done. You do not need to carry nihilism or absurdism or any doctrine with you into sleep. You can let them all fall away like leaves slipping off a branch. Nothing in the universe is waiting for you to figure things out before you close your eyes. There is no deadline on understanding. You are allowed to end this day without a conclusion. You are allowed to let the questions remain unanswered. You are allowed to rest in not knowing. If you are still awake, you can return one last time to the simplest truth available. In, out. Breath moving in a small, temporary body in a vast, indifferent cosmos. No meaning required, no meaning forbidden, just this. And from here you can let yourself drift away in your own time without any need for more words. End of batch 12, approx 760 words.